Obviously climbing up his tree.
Oh, are we live now?
Oh, there we go. Okay, awesome. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Sarah.
So I think we'll wait just a minute to have, people hop on and join us. I know that a bunch of us had shared this, so I'm sure we'll have a couple of people tuning in tonight. But here we are, chatting virtually. This is the future. This is our new normal.
Or the present.
That's true. Well, cool. Well, while we're waiting, and this is a great, can you still see me or did my face freeze?
You froze. I can hear you.
Oh, cool. Oh, I'm back. Okay. Oh, yikes. All right. Well, that'll be fun. So before we get started, I just want to say hi, everyone. Good evening. This is our first evening broadcast for the Millennial Summit Facebook Live. We are taking some time this month to talk to some experts and people in our ether who have some tips and tricks for us as we are navigating some really turbulent times. So before we get started, I just wanted to say Millennial Summit is still planning to be scheduled for August 3rd and 4th. So that's a Monday and a Tuesday. Hopefully by that point we'll be out of the woods on this, but we are obviously monitoring the situation, and we'll obviously make a left turn if we need to. And we wanted to thank Capital One is our title sponsor for the Millennial Summit. So thank you to Capital One for all that they do to help the Millennial Summit grow. But tonight we have Dr. Megan Walls here, who is a good friend of mine and many folks in the Millennial Summit community. Megan is a child psychologist at Nemours. She is also active in a number of different groups, NAMI Delaware, Moms Demand Action, a handful of other groups. And so she's out there doing some really awesome things. So, Megan, tell us why we're here tonight.
Sure. So I think the first thing we want to talk about is just generally that obviously during this really weird time, we know that being quarantined or social distancing and all being in our houses is certainly affecting everyone's mental health. So we thought we'd chat a little bit about some general tips and tricks, some things that are important to sort of think about as we are stuck in houses or in our neighborhoods. And then we'll also do some questions and answers. And part of what I'll talk about is really just for everyone. So whether you're a parent or just an adult at home, kind of thinking about what to do with things, or whether you kind of are thinking about what to do with kids. So I think the very first thing, and I've been saying this a lot lately, is that we really need to make sure that we think about how to prevent any sort of mental health issues getting worse. And that's for, again, both adults and kids. So how do we do that? The very first thing that I think is really important to think about is, what is your schedule right now? Most of us probably are not eating and sleeping and showering on that same schedule we were when we were having to get up and out of the house during the day and go to work or school. So for a week or so, this really is fine. It's like you're on vacation. But after that, our brains get a little bit confused by being out of schedule. So really staying on schedules is super important. And for parents, that does not mean you have to have one of those like color-coded schedules for your kids all day. I'm talking the bigger things. So on work and school days, do things like set an alarm, get up on time when you normally would, try to go to bed when you normally would, eat your meals when you normally would. And another big piece of this is that a lot of us who are working at home or kids who are having, school at home right now, we have to remember to take breaks. So I don't know about anyone else out there, but when I'm working from home and my laptop's in front of me and 5 o'clock rolls by, but I thought I should finish something, I might sit there and finish it. And that's for both adults and kids. So set a timer, take a lunch break, take maybe an afternoon walk, get out of your house for a bit. But have some sort of a schedule you're sticking to. The same goes for things truly, and I know this sounds silly, but I think, I joked to Sarah, I had to take a shower for this. Making sure you're getting up, getting dressed, doing those normal things is super, super important. Another thing that goes right along with that is getting outside and getting moving. So I think one of the most common things I'm hearing from parents is, my kids are already driving me crazy. We're stuck in the house. What do we do? Well, we have to remember that your kids are a lot more active when they're out of the house and at school during the day than perhaps they are if we're expecting them to sit all day. And the same goes for adults. So I think I looked at my watch the other day and had 700 steps all day. I usually have 6,000 walking around at work. So thinking about getting up and getting moving. And one other note on that is when we keep kids on a schedule and moving, they're less likely to have that excess energy. And also we want to make sure that kiddos aren't getting injured during this time. The last thing we want to do is have kids go to the ER. So we want to make sure we're really supervising and getting that energy out. Another really big point about that, which again, I think is true across the board, is when we think about things like anxiety and depression, and we think about the treatments we use for those mental health disorders, one of the things that we use clinically is what we call behavioral activation, or not laying around, really. So thinking about what's something I enjoy doing every day. It doesn't have to be anything big. It could be, I'm going to go outside and water my plants, or I am going to go take my dog on a walk. But really getting out and moving is really important. Another piece, which I think, we are sort of talking here about how to do things differently in this place we're in, right? We're using Facebook Live, we're having like virtual happy hours, is figuring out how to connect to people. So things like making sure you're reaching out and not just isolating. I think one of the most important things here is that a lot of times I'll hear parents or kids even say things like, well, I'm really tired today, or I don't want to anymore. That's when you should reach out the most. So if you're feeling tired, haven't showered that day, don't really want to call a friend, call them anyway. A couple things for kids is that Facebook has a kids messenger that has to be parent approved. It can download right to your kids' app or devices, but you control it all. So everything comes on your Facebook, and they can only talk to other kids. So for example, one of my good friends' daughters was on there and sent me a request, and my daughter can use that on her on one of our iPads while I'm doing some work. So having kids do stuff like that, they can use FaceTime. As long as it's monitored, it's really okay to let your kids talk to their friends during this time. Organizing Zoom calls with their class, and same for adults, right? We've all seen these like virtual happy hours going around. It's really important that we do those things. Another thing that I think is a really hard thing for all of us right now is this balance of quality versus quantity time with people. And I think about that, frankly, for parents with kids, but also adults with their partners or spouses. We, again, are in the house all day. It is very easy to pass each other and feel like you're spending all this time together, but no one's getting that quality. Right. So for, adults, I say like, go eat dinner and turn your phones off with your partner. But for kids, this is really important. Kids really need that kind of connection. So I've talked to a lot of parents who say their kids are really struggling with them working from home. They want their attention all the time. Or perhaps things like, they're coming in every 2 minutes and knocking on the door. Kids just want your attention, but they want your full attention. So plan 5 or 10 minutes, put your devices away, take out Play-Doh or crayons or something your kid can really direct the play around, and spend 5 or 10 minutes a day with them. And you'll see a really big improvement in that constant interruption, because really they're just wanting to have that time that's open to talk to you. And maybe if your job is really busy right now, that might be end of the day, or it might be really early in the morning, but finding that time. And then there's, I think one other big piece of this is that this is stressful for everyone. So I want folks to remember that for kids and for adults, this is a time that's weird and different, and none of us have gone through something quite like this before. So to give each other a little grace. And I think, for parents, that means don't feel like you have to do every school assignment and all your jobs and do the laundry and do the dishes, or you're failing the day. Just do what you can, get through it. And the same goes for adults. If you miss one email that day, it feels really difficult, but you'll figure it out the next day. We want to also make sure that people know that if there are times you feel like things are getting really bad. So for example, your kid stops eating or sleeping, or you stop eating or sleeping, and everyone seems stressed all the time, or every little thing seems to set someone off, whether that's your kid, your spouse, whomever. The lovely part of behavioral health is that we can do telehealth. So I often tell people right now, there's a lot of community behavioral health providers in Delaware who are providing video conferencing type therapy. And so I want people to know that's there, that's available. Certainly at Nemours, we're doing that with our kiddos, and a lot of our community partners, Jewish Family Services, Children Family First, are working on those things too. So I think making sure people just remember that if it's really hard, that's okay. We can figure out how to get you some help. The very last thing I'll say, and then we can chat a bit and do some questions, is this is a virus going on right now, COVID, that we are talking about how quickly it's spreading and how scary it is. And I think it's really important for parents when we're talking to kids, but also as adults ourselves, that we remember that we can't control everything, but we do have some control over this, right? So if we choose to stay at home instead of going out to the park or the playground where there's, equipment we're all going to touch, or as adults, if we choose to stay at home instead of running to Target if we don't need to, that does give us some control. For kids, hand washing, they sing their songs, they think it's fun, but it does actually give them the sense of control. It's a really confusing time for a lot of people. And so if we can give anybody any amount of control, I think that's, a really, really important thing that we do. And we can make sure that we are also sort of making sure that we're going to continue the conversation. So a lot of times what happens is that we end up doing things like talking to our kids once about these things, and then we kind of forget. We might be in this for a few months. So I think returning to these conversations over and over again is really important. That was a lot of words.
No, those were all really good words. I mean, I know exactly what you mean. And I do feel like it's easy to feel kind of helpless right now. One of the things that I've done, and it's really hard to like strike this balance of wanting to be informed, but like not wanting to hear the information. Like I want to know it, but I don't want to like experience having to hear and read the terrible headlines. So I've been very mindful of like my personal social media use. And while that's very atypical for me, I feel like I usually am pretty, constantly on Twitter, constantly getting like news updates. Like I think it's actually really good to have a little bit of a, catered social media diet right now. That may change later, but I like really find myself like if I'm down the rabbit hole on Twitter, I got to get out of there or else I'm going to start endlessly thinking about it. The other thing that you mentioned, quick question for me, and then we'll obviously open it up to anyone who's watching who has a question. You mentioned that telehealth is available, and I think that was largely for adults. Are the same types of resources available for kids? Like if there are parents out there who are feeling like their kid is like probably what I was when I was like 10 or 12 years old, and I had all these questions about like the universe and, our place in it. Yeah. If you have a conversation with a kid that's like feeling to be too much, are there resources out there?
Yes. I think you're still asking questions about the universe, but
yes, I am.
So I have two things about that. I think that the first thing is, yes. So telehealth is for everyone. So I see kids daily right now. And certainly Nemours is doing this, but other, again, community partners are also seeing children. If parents ever feel overwhelmed, that's a really good option to sort of think about, do I need some help explaining these things? The other thing is that we are trying via Nemours and Kids Health to really keep folks updated with new information. We have an article coming out this week about dealing with anxiety and some tips and tricks for kiddos in that sense. So we're going to keep trying to put out as much information as we can. But to your point, we don't want to overwhelm folks. So we don't want to make this an all day, everyday conversation with kids. We want to make this a once in a while. We're going to check in. We're going to make sure we're okay. But we're not going to spend hours a day talking to kids about this. But Kids Health is a really great resource there. And Nemours has been doing a lot of posting on social media for kids too. So Dr. Jonathan Miller, who is one of our pediatricians, did a great video about how we're keeping our patients safe. And about sort of, what things we can do to help keep our families able to function within the hospital. So we're doing a lot of things from that perspective. You mentioned something that made me just think of one other thing as well. One of the things that we talk a lot about is, are there some easy tips and tricks? And so there's a couple things we give kiddos to try to help them do things like be in the moment, stop thinking about the 100 questions. One of them is diaphragmatic breathing, which means helping them breathe, as we call it for kids, low and slow. This is great for adults too. There is a free app called BioBelly, where you put your phone on your belly, and it's what we call in our world biofeedback. So as kids or adults really have that slow, low breathing, it starts to play you music if you're doing well, which is really neat.
That's awesome. Like that's awesome. That's something I would be very into.
It's great for type A, right? It like gives you your feedback. But also, there are a whole lot of resources. YouTube has a lot of great like things that are called guided imagery for kids, but also for adults. So we want to make sure that as we're sort of rolling through this, that we're able to be supportive, but also to make sure that we're giving kids these like kind of little things along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just reading our comments along the side here to see if anyone else has any questions. But no, I mean, this is really helpful. And I think the news today, Governor Carney obviously announced earlier today that schools are now closed also through that May 15th. And I think that, having like a very clear deadline on, how long parents are going to be, homebound with kids, I think is probably a little daunting. And so to be equipped with resources is good. There's a question here. How and when can we widen our circles so that kids can have physical contact with another friend? My 6-year-old is such a social creature, and I worry about him every time he says goodbye to friends on FaceTime on Zoom or on FaceTime and Zoom. That breaks my heart, but it's a really good question. I mean, that's a great question. Scary to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we have to be really honest with our kids right now, but briefly honest. So things like, I'm not really sure, Mommy can't tell you exactly when we can see friends again, but I am so looking forward to it too. We can talk a little bit about things like, if there are kids in your neighborhood who you actually know that you can, if they're, 6-year-old, you can explain to them, you stand on this side of the street, they stand on that side of the street, we can take a walk together. That's okay. That's true social distancing, but it's not okay to have play dates right now. We really have to keep each other safe. The thing that I would say though, is that I think we've sort of forgotten of this lovely art of things like snail mail. So my kids have pen pals right now. We got a letter in the mail from my daughter's pen pal yesterday. I haven't seen her so excited in ages, and she went right and grabbed her crayons and started drawing a picture back. So be creative. It doesn't have to just be Facebook and Zoom. It can be sending each other like a postcard that you print from your phone on some of these apps that can be a picture of the kids when they were playing or whatever it is. But I think also reassuring, this will not go on forever. I know it's really hard. We don't know when, but we do know that, right? So there's things that will happen down the line that will make this end. We will not be inside forever. There will be antivirals, there will be vaccines. But for kids, it's really hard to answer that question of like, this exact date is when, but saying, I'm really sad and I feel you too, but we've got to figure out a different way right now.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I mean, like every day feels like a week when you're a kid. And so I think that it's really hard to like give an honest answer there. Another question, can you talk about trying to teach the understanding of virtual education versus fun technology?
That's a good one. So I think it's all in how you word it here. So I think you can do a couple things. One thing that I highly recommend, actually, because I think we also can't expect our kids to understand things on the level we do right now. So you have to do some, what we call like stimulus control for your kids, right? So there are apps like, there's an app called the Screen Time app, very fancy name. My kids' tablets have screen time on everything that's fun, right? So they get an hour a day of like kids YouTube, but they can get on Clever and Myom, which if you're a parent out there, you know what I'm talking about, as much as they want. So you can actually set those timers separately for your kids, which I really recommend. It takes away the struggle of parent-kid. It takes away the fight, but it also makes it clear to them, right? Hey, this is a learning thing, and this thing maybe isn't as as educational. But I would also really encourage you to think outside the box with educational right now, especially if your kids are not a kid who's in one of those schools that have Zoom set up all day. I think that's, you can certainly be flexible on what's educational. If they're getting bored of those educational apps, walking outside and picking 6 different kinds of leaves and bringing them in and looking up what they are, that's education for an 8-year-old, right? So thinking about, I think 2 things. One is, let's do a little control for them so that they don't have to. But number 2 is really, can we make just the education part more fun when we're at home? Because I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, maybe you're an algebra teacher or something at home listening, but I don't think the rest of us are really like doing super great with our math homework. And I can't do 2nd grade math. I'm sure you guys have seen these memes going around. That's like, my kid's gonna learn to carry a 1. That's not Common Core math. But really, I think trying to figure that out is important, and it helps kids understand sort of what we're doing and how we can keep working through this together.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any more questions, but we can give it a minute, certainly. But while we're here, I know that we've got, there's Charlie, I know you're back there somewhere. If you want to pop up that the screen about what Dana and Philanthropy Delaware and DCF. Oh wow, this is great. It's like I've got an intern, but better. There are a lot of organizations right now that are out there also providing resources. Less on the health and wellness front. That's really important, but I know a lot of our nonprofits are facing some very uncertain times right now. Megan, I know you do a lot of nonprofit work. So if you are a nonprofit person, a nonprofit staffer, just wanted to plug that the Delaware Community Foundation has some resources out there. So you can go to their website. You can see it on the bottom there. There's a fund, there's some resources. I know that Dana and Philanthropy Delaware are working on a big survey, but we're obviously working really hard to make sure that nonprofits that are getting those critical direct services have the funding that they need to continue doing that. I'm sure that NAMI is probably in a very similar boat, kind of thinking about a lot of the work that they do. Speaking of NAMI, got a good question here from Annie. Hi, Annie. What about families where someone is living with a mental health problem? Is there anything additional we should be considering at this time? That's a great question.
It's a really good question. So I think there's, to me, there's 2 pieces of an answer to this kind of question. Number 1 is, please make sure that if your family member is willing, that they'll let you help them figure out how to get some help. Like I said, a lot of us do have some access to telehealth right now. So I'm reminding them like, hey, sounds like you haven't seen your therapist. Can I help you get connected to that? That's number 1. Number 2 is to remember that for anyone who has a mental health condition, whether that's an adult or a kid, it's tiring on folks. So making sure you're taking your breaks and doing self-care is really important. Now we have questions at 7:53.
Yeah.
That's really important. So one is helping that family member, if you can, to connect them and asking their permission for that. So, hey, can I help you talk to your therapist, psychiatrist? But number 2 is making sure that when it gets really stressful, you're taking breaks.
Yeah, no, that's good. And that's, I think, kind of similarly, that I had another question come through, and I'll combine it with this next one, which is becoming really challenging maintaining calm in the house while our 8-year-old is expressing her frustration through attitude and talking back. Similarly, the question that I have is, how do you continue to, if you're an adult who has to work at home, how do you work without having interruption from little kids, and like, how do you kind of maintain order in the house while also doing all these things that we're supposed to be doing, teaching, feeding, all of those things?
Sure. So I think there's, I think there's a couple of questions. One is, again, I'm going to say, give yourself some grace here. No one's perfect in this time. So your boss is likely not going to be super upset if you have a kid run behind you. So try to keep your cool and take a breath and just think about the fact that this is going to pass. This is stressful for all of us. But I think I mentioned this early on, and I really, truly emphasize this. And this is something I emphasize with parents who have kiddos who have difficult behavior in general, which is you need that quality time. If you can give your kids quality time, they are far less likely to interrupt you, but they're also far less likely to have that frustration, because when they're frustrated in the moment, they're throwing their crayon at you while you're on a call. It's not because they're frustrated in that moment. It's because they're frustrated that they're not getting your attention overall. Or maybe you don't know it, but something's really bothering them. Or maybe they're anxious about COVID, right? We don't know unless we take some time to ask. And I think the other piece of that is making time to have those breaks during the day. So look at your schedule ahead of time. I can have a break from 11 to 11:30. It might get screwed up. That happens. But if you know you have a break at that time the night before, think about like, what could I do for 10 minutes? Not this craft project that's going to make a mess of my kitchen, but 10 minutes. So maybe it's, I can play one game of Uno with them. And I know I have enough time to do that. Do that. Pick small things. And then the one other thing I'll just touch on, and I can see all these questions popping up, guys. Thank you. But I think the other answer is it's okay to take a break. And like you said, an 8-year-old in that question, go lock your door. They're okay for 10 minutes. Go take a hot shower. Like you can take those breaks. You have my permission. And it's really, really important that we make sure that we are all staying sane during this period, but it's also really important that we're touching on those needs in the time we can so that we're not having that backlash.
I think your point about like, you know, it's the long game here. It's like, it's very much a marathon, not a sprint, especially now that we've got like dates on the calendar that we need to be mindful of. So I think that's a really excellent point. Couple other questions. Can you touch on the difference between replicating school at home versus transitioning to an entirely new concept of learning? That is a complicated question.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, we're not doing that. We're not replicating school at home. We can't do that. That's not realistic. So what can we do? And I think what we can do is, you know, I will give a shout out to my homeschool friends who are amazing and do things like share their resources. There is a homeschool group on Facebook for Delaware. I have pulled resources from them. They have been very kind and supportive and said things like, you don't need a color coordinated schedule the first day. We just need to get through the day, right? So even we're home and we're trying to slowly do this, I don't think anyone expects us to look like replicating school. And instead, let's think about some of those fun, entertaining things we can do, but also making sure we're communicating that to our kids. You're not going to be sitting at the kitchen table from 9 to 4. I'm going to give you, I don't know, a checklist of 5 or 10 things. Do as many as you can today. Come to me for breaks, right? So kind of changing the way we're all thinking about it is really helpful.
A complicated question, but a very straightforward answer. Good job. Next question. Okay, so we've got a 3-year-old, right? Only child. While his school's offering childcare, parents have pulled him out. Understandable. They've done a couple of FaceTime chats, but mom's concerned about this kid's lack of interaction with other kids his age. Totally understandable. Is this something that you should really be worried about?
No. So I totally get it. We want kids around other kids their age, but I said this a few minutes ago, and I mean this is not forever. This is in a 3-year-old's mind. Your 3-year-old's probably not even going to remember, knock on something, if this is 2, 3, 4 months even, right? That's not going to be a big impact. Secondly, good news for you is in the first 5 years of life, a caring, consistent adult is the most important person in a kid's life. You make the most impact on brain development, on social development, and I don't mean that as a pressure, although parents sometimes feel that, but really at this age, kids need their parents more than they need anything else. So you're probably better off than some of us who have older kids who really would like that social interaction. And sure, at 3, you can do FaceTime chats and some of that stuff, but also, you know, as long as you're able to do some actual literal FaceTime with your kid and spending some time with him, that's really what's most important at that age.
That is awesome. Well, it's about 8 o'clock. I know that you could probably sit here all night and, you know, calm a lot of parents, calm a lot of non-parents with good advice and a level head here. But I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on. Is there anything else that we didn't address tonight that you want to make a plug for, or?
No, I think really just that if folks are concerned, whether they're adults or kids, I really do want people to think about the fact that this is a really hard time and that we understand that. And I don't think that anyone's judging anyone else for how anxious or upset or whatever folks are. I want people to remember that we are all in this together and that we are going to do our best, but it's not going to be perfect all the time. And I think if we can remember that, we're in a lot better place. And I think if folks can't figure it out, right, people are still really anxious, people are still feeling really depressed, I really do encourage you to you know, look to our community, or you can call your insurance company for therapists that are covered. But there's been a lot of work done around telehealth, and it's a lot more accessible right now during the state of emergency. So certainly, I think that's a really important thing, that folks just know that there are options. I'll plug NAMI Delaware here too. They do a great job of helping people find resources for adults, for kiddos, certainly. You can go to, as I said, Kids Health. We also have a mental health webpage. I will try to send it to you and put it in here, but it's nemours.org/kidscope. And that gives you a lot of information about all of the things that you can sort of talk to your kids about around mental health, but it also does have a huge list of resources for referrals as well.
Awesome. That's great. One of the things that we are talking about this year at the Millennial Summit is I'm really excited. We're putting together a panel, and it's going to be sponsored in large part by Highmark and some folks there. But we're going to be talking about, I think a lot of millennials in particular don't know all that their health insurance plans have to offer and like don't necessarily know how to maximize that. And so it's great that there are some community resources, but I think that there are a lot of people who are underutilizing like what they're already paying for month to month. So we're going to have a panel at the Millennial Summit that's going to kind of talk about some things that you might not know. And it froze again. That's, oh, good. Okay. It was really short. Whew.
Yeah.
That was a really hilarious post.
The one thing I'll say about that is I'm going to give my Nemours colleagues some credit. Our population health folks actually came out with a health literacy program for high schoolers that has now been shared hundreds of times. So I think, we're right on board with you. We agree. We feel like teenagers weren't really knowing. Teenagers and young adults. So they were transitioning out of their care. They're 22 years old and they're calling us asking who to go to or what to do. So I think it's a really important piece. I'll send that your way.
Awesome. Well, that's good. Well, everyone, thank you for tuning in tonight. Megan, thank you so much for taking the time. I know a lot of people are really grateful for the advice. And Charlie, I don't actually know how to turn this off, so I think you're going to have to do that, or else we'll be up here riffing all night. So this is good. Awesome. Thanks, Megan. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, guys. Have a good night.
Bye.